The darkness of March 10, 1945, pressed down on Tokyo like a suffocating blanket. 2 hours past midnight, in the Nihonbashi district, an emergency coordinator's trembling fingers gripped his pencil. The instrument shook so violently he could barely form letters. Words scratched across the district logbook. Words that would echo through generations of nightmares. The rain burns. Fire falls from heaven itself. Every breath draws flame into our lungs. Through the emergency station's cracked windowpane, he watched reality collapse. 4 years of military promises crumbled before his eyes. The propaganda machine had lied about everything. Above the city, glowing fragments descended like deadly snowflakes. Each ember bloomed into liquid hellfire upon contact. The molten streams flowed down streets with impossible persistence. They climbed building walls with supernatural hunger. They leaped across alleyways as if alive. American B-29 bombers circled overhead like mechanical vultures. Their bellies had released something beyond conventional bombs. M69 incendiary clusters packed with napalm burned at temperatures that defied nature. 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit transformed the very air into flame. Canal water began to boil. The heat created its own weather patterns. Below in the Shitamachi district, over 1 million souls lived packed together. Their homes were paper and wood constructions. The density reached 103,000 people per square mile. Narrow streets wound between buildings like arteries. The Americans had chosen their target with surgical precision. This would become the deadliest air raid in human history. 279 Boeing B-29 superfortresses had launched from 3 island bases. The massive formation represented just part of the 325 bombers that had taken off hours earlier. Every defensive gun except tail positions had been stripped away. Maximum bomb capacity meant maximum destruction. Inside their bomb bays, 1,065 tons of incendiary weapons waited. 500,000 individual M69 bomblets filled cluster after cluster. The target zone measured just 3 miles by 4 miles. A rectangle of death drawn across Tokyo's heart. Every citizen had been assured by their government that such an attack was impossible. American bombers could never reach Japan's capital. Even if they somehow arrived, Tokyo's firefighting brigades would handle any threat. The Emperor's divine protection would shield them. None of them understood they were witnessing the beginning of Japan's psychological destruction. Everything they believed about American capabilities was about to shatter. Their faith in their own invincibility would crumble tonight. Modern warfare would reveal its true face in rivers of liquid fire. The mathematics of national collapse had been written months before this night. The calculations existed not in distant military defeats, but in production statistics from American factories. The hopelessness of Japan's cause would soon become undeniable. The collapse had actually begun in late 1944. B-29 superfortresses became operational from bases in the Mariana Islands. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam had fallen after brutal summer fighting. American forces paid in blood for these stepping stones to Japan. These islands sat just 1,500 miles from Tokyo. For the first time, Japan's home islands fell within range of America's newest bomber. The strategic situation had fundamentally shifted. Major General Curtis LeMay assumed command of 21st Bomber Command on January 20, 1945. This veteran of European bombing campaigns inherited a failing strategy. High-altitude precision bombing had achieved less than 5% accuracy. The campaign was a spectacular failure. Bombers operating from 30,000 feet faced a meteorological phenomenon Americans had just discovered. The jet stream created winds reaching 250 miles per hour. These hurricane-force air currents scattered bombs miles from their intended targets. Precision became impossible. The B-29s themselves presented constant mechanical problems. Each aircraft cost $639,000 to build. In today's money, that equals $11 million per plane. Yet these technological marvels suffered chronic engine failures at high altitude. The massive R-3350 engines were the most powerful aircraft engines ever mass-produced. Their immense power came with a deadly flaw. During long climbs to bombing altitude, the engines frequently caught fire. By January 1945, more B-29s had been lost to mechanical failures than to enemy action. The first shock to Japanese assumptions came from an unexpected direction. American chemistry had been working against them for years. At Harvard University, Dr. Louis Fieser led a team focused on a specifically Japanese problem. They knew that 90% of Tokyo's buildings used wood, bamboo, and paper construction. Traditional incendiary bombs filled with magnesium or thermite burned intensely but briefly. What Fieser created was entirely different. Sticky jellied gasoline would adhere to any surface. The substance burned for up to 30 minutes continuously. The formula appeared deceptively simple. Aluminum salts of naphthenic acid and palmitic acid mixed with standard gasoline. They named it napalm. The word combined the first syllables of naphthenic and palmitic acid. When Fieser completed his formula on February 14, 1942, he had created one of the 20th century's most feared weapons. Standard Oil Development Company worked with the Office of Scientific Research and Development throughout the war. They had begun developing the M69 delivery system in October 1941. This was 2 months before Pearl Harbor. American war planners had long anticipated the need to burn Japanese cities. The revelation of American capabilities began not over Japan, but in the Utah desert. At Dugway Proving Ground, the U.S. Army constructed exact replicas of Japanese neighborhoods. Every detail was precisely accurate. Tatami mat floors, sliding paper doors, and authentic Japanese wood construction filled the test site. German architect Erich Mendelssohn had been hired to ensure perfection. This Jewish refugee understood the importance of accurate testing. The experiments conducted throughout 1943 produced data that would have terrified Japanese leadership. A single M69 incendiary cluster weighing just 500 pounds could reliably start fires across 2,500 square feet. The napalm gel would splatter on impact. Burning globs flew up to 100 feet in every direction. Most critically, water would not extinguish the flames. The burning gel simply floated on water and continued burning. Traditional Japanese firefighting methods became completely useless. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McNamara served as a statistical analyst for the Army Air Forces. His calculations showed that 68 Japanese cities could be completely destroyed with available B-29 forces. The analysis presented to LeMay in February 1945 was devastating. Switching from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude incendiary attacks would increase destruction efficiency by 500%. The mathematics of death had been precisely calculated. Meanwhile, Japanese leadership remained dangerously ignorant of these preparations. Colonel Shigeo Nakajima headed Tokyo's Air Defense Command. He would later admit their fatal miscalculation. We believed the Americans would continue high-altitude daylight precision bombing as they had in Europe. The possibility of low-altitude night incendiary raids was never seriously considered. Our entire defense was based on this assumption. February 25, 1945, brought Tokyo's first major incendiary test. The attack arrived without warning or precedent. 231 B-29s dropped 453 tons of incendiaries on a 1 square-mile section. 28,000 buildings were destroyed. 3,000 people died. This was merely LeMay's experiment. He was testing whether Japanese air defenses could handle low-altitude attacks. The results exceeded his expectations. Police photographer Kojo Ishikawa documented the damage the following morning. He noticed something unprecedented in his records. The fires had not simply burned buildings. They had created their own wind systems. Immense incandescent vortices rose in several places. They sucked whole blocks of houses into a molten stream of fire. The photograph showed destruction beyond normal fire behavior. The Japanese military response revealed fatal misconceptions about American intentions. General Masakazu Kawabe served as deputy chief of the Army General Staff. He dismissed the raid as mere harassment. His assurance to Emperor Hirohito would prove tragically wrong. Tokyo's 8,000 firefighters were organized into neighborhood brigades. They could handle any American incendiary attack. The general possessed complete confidence in traditional methods. The government distributed wooden buckets and sand to civilians throughout the city. Daily drills became mandatory. Housewives practiced beating out flames with wet mops. The preparations would prove pathetically inadequate. Behind American targeting lay an intelligence network of unprecedented scope. Japanese Americans recruited from internment camps translated captured documents. They identified industrial targets dispersed among residential areas. Sergeant Ben Kuroki flew 58 combat missions despite his family being interned. He later revealed the extent of American knowledge. We knew exactly where every small factory was hidden. Every workshop in someone's home was mapped. The Japanese thought dispersal would protect their industry. Instead, it gave LeMay the justification to burn entire cities. Military necessity could justify any level of civilian casualties. March 9, 1945, at 5:35 p.m. Guam's North Field began launching the largest bombing raid ever assembled. The first B-29, nicknamed Dauntless Dottie, began its takeoff roll. Over the next 2 hours and 45 minutes, 325 superfortresses would launch. 3 islands contributed to the massive formation. Guam, Saipan, and Tinian sent their bombers toward Tokyo. The convergence would create history's most devastating air attack. LeMay had made 3 radical decisions that transformed the mission completely. First, all defensive guns except tail positions were removed. Gunners and ammunition stayed behind to maximize bomb capacity. Second, bombers would attack at night between 5,000 and 7,000 feet. This altitude stayed below effective radar detection and heavy anti-aircraft gun range. Third, each plane would carry 40 cluster bombs. Inside each cluster, 1,520 individual M69 incendiary bomblets waited. This represented double the normal bomb load. The lead Pathfinder aircraft arrived over Tokyo at 12:08 a.m. on March 10th. They marked the target area with napalm bombs in a giant flaming X. The navigation aid glowed like a beacon against the dark city below. The main force followed in carefully planned waves. Their incendiaries dropped in a calculated pattern, designed to create a ring of fire. The ring would trap residents inside an ever-shrinking circle of death. Tail gunner Sergeant James Krantz watched the first bombs impact from his position. At first, it looked like silver snow falling through the darkness. Then each bomblet erupted into a pool of fire about 10 feet across. Within minutes, thousands of these pools merged together. Rivers of fire flowed through the streets below. The geometric pattern became an organic monster consuming everything in its path. Weather conditions proved catastrophic for Tokyo's residents. Surface winds reached 45 to 67 miles per hour from the southwest. These natural winds combined with the firestorm's convection currents to create something unprecedented. Pilots described solid sheets of flame leaping 300 feet into the air. The fires were creating their own weather system. Scientists would later term this phenomenon a firestorm. Superheated air rose so violently it created hurricane-force winds at ground level. These winds sucked oxygen from underground shelters. Fresh air fed the flames with continuous fuel. The fires became self-sustaining. B-29 pilot Robert Morgan had previously flown the famous Memphis Belle in Europe. His experience over Germany provided no preparation for this night. At 5,000 feet, the thermal updrafts were so violent they threw our 140,000-pound bomber around like a leaf. The turbulence was worse than any anti-aircraft fire I experienced over Germany. Our instruments went crazy. The altimeter couldn't track our actual height. The target area contained more than dense residential housing. Thousands of small workshops produced components for Japan's war industry throughout the district. The government had deliberately dispersed production after the 1942 Doolittle raid. They believed this strategy would protect vital industry from American bombing. Instead, this dispersion gave LeMay the rationale to target entire residential districts. Every neighborhood potentially contained war production. Radio operator Staff Sergeant Carl Breitling monitored Japanese civilian defense frequencies throughout the attack. At first, there was organized chatter. Fire brigades coordinated their responses professionally. Within 30 minutes, the tone changed to panic. Then screaming replaced professional communication. Then silence fell across the frequencies. One by one, the radio stations went dead. The firestorm's intensity exceeded all predictions made by American planners. Temperatures reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit in the fire's core. This heat was sufficient to melt glass and aluminum instantly. The Sumida River, where residents fled for safety, began to boil. Asphalt streets liquefied under the intense heat. People attempting to flee found themselves trapped in molten pavement. Their feet sank into the burning surface. By 2:30 a.m., 2.5 hours into the raid, destruction had achieved a scale that shattered Japanese understanding of warfare itself. Police records later documented desperate attempts to coordinate evacuation efforts. One district commander's report revealed the complete inadequacy of all preparations. We had drilled for conventional fires that spread building to building. This was entirely different. The fire was everywhere simultaneously. It fell from the sky like rain. It flowed through streets like water. It jumped across fire breaks we thought were impossible to cross. The most devastating blow to Japanese assumptions came from the behavior of the M69 bomblets themselves. Each bomblet, upon impact, shot burning napalm up to 100 feet horizontally. Everything within range was coated in sticky fire that water couldn't extinguish. Firefighters watched in horror as their hoses merely spread the burning gel. Traditional firefighting techniques made the situation worse. Water carried the napalm to new locations. Dr. Kubota Shigenori headed a rescue squad operating in the affected area. His recorded observations challenged basic physics as Japanese understood it. The heat was so intense that people burst into flames without being touched by fire. Their clothes would suddenly ignite from radiant heat alone. We saw families fleeing, thinking they had escaped the danger zone. They would combust spontaneously 50 meters from the visible flames. American bombers, meanwhile, experienced their own revelation about the power they had unleashed. Bombardier Lieutenant John Sauer watched his instruments register unprecedented readings. The thermal column was so powerful it registered on our altimeter. We were supposedly at 5,000 feet, but the heat was pushing us up to 7,000, even 8,000 feet. The entire city had become a blast furnace. As dawn broke on March 10th, the scale of destruction defied human comprehension. Reconnaissance photos taken by F-13 aircraft showed 15.8 square miles of Tokyo had been completely incinerated. The modified B-29 photoplanes captured images that stunned American intelligence analysts. Entire districts had simply vanished from existence, not damaged or burned, but completely erased. Where neighborhoods had stood 6 hours earlier, only gray ash remained. Japanese police reports captured after the war documented the immediate human toll. 83,793 people were confirmed dead. Authorities admitted many bodies had been completely consumed by fire. 267,171 buildings were destroyed. Over 1 million people became homeless in a single night. These statistics failed to capture the psychological impact on survivors. 16-year-old Sachio Masako survived by submerging herself in a water tank. She remained underwater until the fire passed over her location. When she emerged at dawn, her entire world had disappeared. There were no landmarks left. No streets remained visible. Just gray ash extended as far as I could see. I couldn't find where my house had been. Everyone I knew was dead or missing. The breakdown of civil authority was immediate and complete throughout the affected area. Tokyo's fire department had confidently assured citizens they could handle any air raid. They ceased to exist as an organized force within 2 hours. Of 8,000 firefighters, over 1,000 died during the first night. Hundreds more suffered severe burns that left them unable to work. Their equipment mostly consisted of hand-drawn pumps and wooden ladders. Everything proved utterly useless against napalm fires. In the days following March 10th, Tokyo faced a humanitarian crisis that exposed the fragility of Japanese civil defense preparations. The government had no contingency plans for casualties on this unprecedented scale. Makeshift morgues were established in schools, temples, and public parks. Bodies were stacked in ways that shocked even hardened government officials. Mass cremation became the only option for disposal. The psychological impact on survivors proved as devastating as the physical destruction itself. Yoshiko Hashimoto searched for her mother among thousands of corpses laid out for identification. She described scenes that challenged human comprehension. The bodies were all black and shrunken to the size of children. You couldn't tell men from women or adults from children anymore. Some were fused together in final embraces. Families who died holding each other. The government's response revealed its complete unpreparedness for disaster on this scale. Emperor Hirohito toured the destroyed areas on March 18th. His aide, Marquis Kido, recorded the emperor's visible shock. His Majesty stood silent for a long time, staring at the devastation. Then he said, "Tokyo has become a burned field. The capital of the empire has become a burned field." Yet even this devastation failed to immediately change Japanese military strategy or realistic assessment of the war situation. The government ordered increased production of bamboo spears for civilians to repel the anticipated American invasion. Information about the raid's true scale was systematically suppressed. Newspapers were forbidden to publish casualty figures or photographs of the destruction. The government maintained the fiction that Japan could still win. The systematic destruction of Japan's cities followed a carefully planned schedule developed by American planners. On March 11th, even as Tokyo still burned, 285 B-29s struck Nagoya. This city served as center of Japan's aircraft industry. The Mitsubishi engine plant produced 40% of Japan's aircraft engines. Direct hits from 1,338 tons of incendiaries eliminated this crucial facility. Factory worker Tanaka Hideyoshi watched from a hillside as his workplace vanished. The Americans dropped fire in perfect patterns like farmers planting rice in organized rows. Each bomb created a square of fire. The squares merged into an ocean of flame. In 20 minutes, factories that took years to build were completely gone. The campaign's industrial logic proved relentless in its efficiency. Osaka served as Japan's second-largest city and center of textile production. The city received 274 B-29s on March 13th. The raiders destroyed 8.1 square miles, including 134 war factories. Kobe functioned as the major port and shipbuilding center. 7 square miles were lost on March 16th. The Kawasaki submarine yards and aircraft factories were completely eliminated. The precision of American target selection revealed an intelligence network that Japanese security had never imagined possible. Small workshops hidden in residential areas were systematically destroyed. Unmarked factories in converted schools received direct hits. Even individual homes where families assembled aircraft components were precisely targeted. Post-war investigations revealed that American intelligence, aided by pre-war business records and Japanese-American translators, had mapped Japan's entire industrial infrastructure. By April 1945, the cumulative impact of firebombing was producing what Japanese military psychiatrists termed spiritual collapse among the civilian population. Secret police reports discovered after the war documented increasing defeatism throughout the country. Citizens openly questioned whether the emperor was truly divine if he couldn't protect them from American bombs. Traditional beliefs crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Lieutenant General Noboru Tazoi held responsibility for air defense of the homeland. He admitted in a post-war interrogation that the March raids had shattered all illusions. After the March raids, I knew we could not win this war. The Americans could destroy any city at will whenever they chose. We had no defense against night incendiary attacks. Our preparations were completely inadequate. The most devastating blow to Japanese morale came from an unexpected source that demonstrated American psychological warfare capabilities. Leaflets dropped before raids initially were dismissed as mere propaganda. These warnings began accurately predicting which cities would be destroyed and when. The psychological impact of knowing destruction was coming, but being powerless to prevent it, proved absolutely crushing to civilian morale. Dr. Masao Maruyama served as a political scientist who survived the raids. He later wrote extensively about their psychological impact. The leaflets destroyed our concept of honorable death in battle. This wasn't warfare as we understood it. It was scheduled extermination announced in advance. The Americans announced they would burn our cities, and then they did exactly that on schedule. We were not defeated in battle. We were processed for destruction. The weather itself became a tool of war, as deadly as any bomb ever created. American meteorologists had unlocked the secrets of perfect destruction. They could forecast the exact conditions needed for maximum devastation. Low humidity readings, strong wind patterns, crystal clear skies above their targets. These weather specialists timed their attacks with scientific precision. They waited for nature to provide the ideal conditions for turning individual fires into massive infernos that would consume everything in their path. The devastating March 10th assault on Tokyo succeeded because weather forecasters had predicted something crucial. Powerful southwestern winds would sweep across the city that night. These winds would merge scattered fires into one massive conflagration. Captain Robert Nelson served as the chief weather officer for the 21st Bomber Command. His explanation later would chill listeners to the bone. Those winds represented our secret weapon. We knew they would transform dozens of separate fires into a single wall of flame that would devour the entire city. The weather had become our ally in destruction. We turned atmospheric conditions into instruments of warfare. The Japanese authorities possessed no such sophisticated weather prediction capabilities. Their meteorological services remained primitive compared to American technology. Japanese civil defense maintained the same procedures regardless of weather conditions. They never understood that certain atmospheric patterns made firefighting completely impossible. Their defenders prepared the same way, whether conditions favored survival or guaranteed death. American strategists even manipulated Japanese perceptions of weather threats. They deliberately launched harassment raids during storms and poor visibility. These nuisance attacks forced Japanese defenders to maintain constant alert status during the worst weather. Exhausted defenders would scramble repeatedly during storms. Air raid sirens would wail through rain and wind. Citizens would crowd into shelters night after night. Then, when perfect firestorm conditions finally arrived, the defense forces were completely worn down from false alarms. By the summer of 1945, the American firebombing strategy had achieved something unprecedented. The complete psychological and industrial collapse of Japanese civilian society had occurred. Secret police reports painted a picture of utter hopelessness among the population. Only 32% of ordinary citizens still believed Japan could achieve anything resembling victory. The numbers revealed the depth of civilian despair. Hope had died in the ashes of their cities. Industrial war production had crashed to catastrophic levels. Output had fallen to just 15% of what Japan had managed in 1944. Over 8.5 million people now lived as homeless refugees. They huddled in temporary shelters or fled desperately toward the countryside. The atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki would shock the world with their revolutionary technology. Yet these nuclear weapons actually killed fewer people than the conventional firebombing campaign had already accomplished. The numbers told a stark story of comparative destruction. Hiroshima's death toll reached approximately 146,000 souls. Nagasaki claimed another 80,000 lives. Combined, these nuclear attacks killed fewer people than the firebombing had already consumed. Estimates placed conventional bombing deaths between 330,000 and 900,000 Japanese civilians. The combination of both bombing campaigns finally convinced Emperor Hirohito that surrender was inevitable. America had demonstrated unlimited conventional destructive capacity. They also possessed revolutionary new weapons that could vaporize entire cities instantly. Hirohito's August 15, 1945 surrender broadcast specifically mentioned the new and most cruel bomb. These words would echo through history books. But privately, the emperor had been more deeply influenced by the systematic destruction of Japanese cities through conventional means. According to diary entries by his aide, Marquis Kido, His Majesty had expressed a chilling realization. The American firebombing demonstrated they could destroy Japan completely without ever launching a ground invasion. The atomic bomb simply made that destruction faster and more efficient. The B-29 campaign represented the largest industrial undertaking in human history up to that point. The program consumed $3 billion. That amount equals approximately $50 billion in today's currency. The cost exceeded even the Manhattan Project's massive budget. 4 major corporations collaborated on this unprecedented production effort. Boeing, Bell, Martin, and Fisher built 3,170 B-29 bombers at 4 massive manufacturing plants. Each aircraft represented a miracle of industrial engineering and coordination. Every single B-29 contained 55,000 manufactured parts. An additional 8,000 purchased items went into each bomber. Each aircraft required 2,000 separate engineering drawings. Construction demanded 100,000 hours of skilled labor per plane. The Wright R-3350 engines powered these flying fortresses despite persistent mechanical problems. These engines represented the absolute pinnacle of piston engine technology available during the war. 18 cylinders generated 2,200 horsepower each. This enormous power gave the B-29 an operational range of 3,250 miles, while carrying 20,000 pounds of bombs. No other aircraft in the world could match this combination of range and payload capacity. The logistical achievement matched the industrial miracle happening back home. Building airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam required moving 11 million cubic yards of earth and coral. Heavy machinery worked around the clock to create these bases from scratch. North Field on Tinian became the world's largest airport during wartime. 6 runways each measured 8,500 feet in length. These runways could handle 269 B-29 bombers simultaneously. The scale defied comprehension. Engineers installed 15,000 miles of communications wire across these Pacific islands. They constructed fuel farms capable of holding 16 million gallons of aviation gasoline. The existence of this infrastructure in the middle of the Pacific Ocean demonstrated American capabilities that exceeded Japanese understanding. Admiral Soemu Toyota later admitted the shocking difference in capabilities. Japanese forces couldn't build a single adequate airfield on islands they had controlled for decades. Meanwhile, Americans built dozens of sophisticated air bases on islands they had just captured while still actively fighting. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki must be understood within the larger context of the firebombing campaign. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had already been substantially destroyed through conventional bombing. The nuclear weapons represented revolutionary physics, but evolutionary strategic impact. Colonel Paul Tibbets piloted the Enola Gay on its historic mission to Hiroshima. He had previously participated in numerous conventional bombing raids over Japan. His later observations provided crucial perspective on the comparative destruction. The atomic bomb was cleaner and quicker than conventional raids, but it wasn't necessarily more destructive than firebombing attacks. Tokyo, after March 10th, looked worse than Hiroshima after August 6th. The scale of conventional destruction had been that complete. The Japanese military's initial response to Hiroshima revealed their numbed acceptance of city-scale destruction. Many military leaders initially assumed the attack was simply another massive firebombing raid. Only when radiation effects became apparent did they understand something fundamentally different had occurred. General Kawabe's first reaction demonstrated this confusion. He felt relief that only one aircraft had been involved in the attack. This meant America couldn't possess many such weapons. The logic seemed sound based on conventional bombing patterns. What atomic weapons provided was efficiency rather than greater total destruction. A single aircraft could now destroy an entire city instead of requiring hundreds of bombers. This efficiency, combined with mysterious radiation effects that killed survivors weeks later, finally convinced Japanese hardliners. Continued resistance had become futile. The decision to surrender was debated intensely in the Supreme Council for the direction of the war. The firebombing campaign fundamentally shaped every aspect of these crucial discussions. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai presented the strategic reality with brutal clarity. B-29 bombers had already destroyed most Japanese cities. The atomic bomb simply made this destruction more efficient. Japan could defend against neither conventional nor nuclear attacks. War Minister General Korochika Anami represented the strongest opposition to surrender among government leaders. He had received detailed intelligence reports about American incendiary production capacity. His staff calculated that America possessed sufficient napalm supplies to destroy every remaining city and town in Japan. At current production rates, the Americans could maintain their bombing campaign indefinitely. Japanese resistance would eventually face complete national annihilation rather than mere military defeat. The most influential voice belonged to Prince Fumimaro Konoe, who spoke directly to Emperor Hirohito about the strategic situation. American bombing had already destroyed Japan's fundamental ability to wage war effectively. Continuing the conflict meant not just defeat, but complete annihilation of the Japanese people. Every week of delay would result in another city being completely erased from existence. The mathematics of destruction had become undeniable and terrifying. During the climactic Imperial Conference on August 10, 1945, Emperor Hirohito finally made his decision. His words revealed the emotional weight of witnessing his nation's destruction. He could not bear to see innocent people suffer any longer under the relentless bombing. Continuing the war meant only that more Japanese blood would be spilled uselessly. The sacrifice had lost all meaning in the face of overwhelming American destructive capacity. When American occupation forces entered Japan in September 1945, they discovered the true extent of the devastation their bombing campaign had achieved. General Douglas MacArthur's staff conducted systematic surveys of the damage across the Japanese home islands. Their findings revealed that 40% of Japan's total urban area had been completely destroyed. In the 66 cities specifically targeted by bombers, 2.5 million buildings had been reduced to ash and rubble. Industrial production had collapsed to less than 10% of normal capacity. The human toll became clearer through captured Japanese government records. Official counts listed 330,000 deaths from conventional bombing alone. However, municipal records suggested actual deaths numbered between 500,000 and 900,000 people. Millions more suffered permanent injuries from the bombing campaign. Burns covered their bodies with permanent scars. Respiratory damage from smoke inhalation plagued survivors for decades. Psychological trauma would last entire lifetimes for those who witnessed the destruction. American military engineers surveying the damage expressed shock at their own success. Colonel John Montgomery inspected the ruins of Tokyo and wrote detailed reports about what he found. Entire areas stretching 8 to 10 square miles contained absolutely nothing recognizable. Not even rubble remained in these zones, not foundations or twisted metal, just gray ash covering the ground like snow. The landscape resembled the surface of the moon more than a human city. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted immediately after Japan's surrender, reached a significant conclusion. Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 even without atomic bombs or a ground invasion. The conventional bombing campaign and naval blockade alone would have forced capitulation. In the decades following the war's end, survivors of the firebombing organized to preserve their experiences for future generations. Katsumoto Saotomi established the Center of the Tokyo Raids and War Damages in 2002. This archive eventually contained over 3,000 individual survivor testimonies. His dedicated work revealed countless stories that official histories had completely ignored. The human dimension of the bombing campaign emerged through these personal accounts of loss and survival. Masako Yamada lost her entire family during the March 10, 1945 raid on Tokyo. She spent the next 40 years of her life documenting the names of victims from her neighborhood alone. Her handwritten lists, now preserved in the Tokyo Peace Museum, contain 3,847 individual names. These were people whose existence would otherwise be completely forgotten by history. Each name represented a life cut short by the flames that consumed their city. Haruyo Nihei survived as a child by hiding under corpses during the Tokyo raid. She later became a peace educator and spoke to over 100,000 students about her traumatic experience. Her message remained consistent throughout decades of speaking. War consists of more than statistics and strategic calculations. War means a child watching her mother burn alive and being completely unable to provide help. These personal testimonies revealed the permanent psychological damage inflicted on survivors. Many reported lifelong phobias of fire that never diminished with time. They couldn't attend fireworks displays or watch campfires. Panic attacks were triggered by air raid sirens used for routine fire drills decades after the war ended. Many survivors never spoke of their experiences until decades later. The trauma remained too profound for words. The psychological wounds never properly healed despite the passage of time. The M69 incendiary bomb represented a masterpiece of destructive engineering designed specifically for maximum devastation. Each individual bomblet contained 2.6 pounds of napalm gel packed inside a 20-inch hexagonal steel pipe casing. The genius of this weapon lay in its sophisticated delivery mechanism. 38 bomblets were packed together in an E-46 cluster container. This cluster opened at 2,000 feet altitude, scattering the individual M69 bomblets over a wide target area. Upon impact with buildings or streets, a 3 to 5 second delay fuse ignited white phosphorus. This phosphorus shot the napalm gel through the tail section of the bomb casing. The gel heated to temperatures between 800 and 1,200 degrees Celsius. The burning gel sprayed in a 100-foot stream, coating everything it touched with sticky fire. The napalm would continue burning for 15 to 30 minutes. This duration far exceeded conventional incendiary weapons of the era. Testing at Dugway Proving Ground had perfected the napalm formula through extensive experimentation. Scientists discovered that adding polystyrene to the napalm mixture created a substance that adhered more effectively to surfaces. They tested different concentrations until achieving optimal balance between adherence and spread patterns. The cluster bomb dispersal pattern was mathematically calculated for maximum area coverage. Operations research specialists determined that 38 bomblets per cluster dropped in specific geometric patterns would create overlapping fire zones. These overlapping fires would merge into a general conflagration within 20 minutes of impact. The entire system was designed with scientific precision to maximize destruction. Behind every B-29 bombing raid lay an industrial achievement that completely dwarfed Japan's entire war production capacity. The Boeing manufacturing plant in Wichita covered 1.6 million square feet of factory floor space. This facility employed 29,000 workers operating on 3 continuous shifts. At peak production levels, they completed one finished B-29 bomber every 90 minutes. The industrial rhythm never stopped. The supply chain for these aircraft stretched across the entire American continent. Engines came from Wright Aeronautical Corporation in New Jersey. Propellers were manufactured by Hamilton Standard in Connecticut. Navigation instruments were produced by Sperry Corporation in New York. Gun turrets came from General Electric factories. Each component required its own vast production infrastructure, employing thousands of additional workers. The aluminum requirements alone demonstrated the scale of American industrial might compared to Japanese capabilities. Each B-29 required 60,000 pounds of aluminum for its construction. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee, powered by TVA electricity, produced more aluminum in a single month than Japan managed to produce in an entire year. The electrical power required just for aluminum production exceeded Japan's total national power generation capacity. The comparison revealed the hopeless industrial disparity between the two nations. The aircrew training pipeline matched the massive industrial effort required to build the bombers. By 1945, America was graduating 1,000 trained B-29 crew members every month from training bases in Kansas, Nebraska, and New Mexico. Each crew underwent 6 months of intensive training before deployment to the Pacific Theater. This training included 400 hours of actual flight time. No crew deployed without meeting these rigorous standards. The firebombing campaign revolutionized strategic bombing doctrine that had developed over decades. Previous theories created by Italian General Giulio Douhet and American General Billy Mitchell had emphasized precision bombing of specific military and industrial targets. LeMay's area bombing campaign proved that general destruction could be more strategically effective than precision targeting. This was particularly true against Japan's dispersed cottage industry manufacturing system. The campaign validated economist John Kenneth Galbraith's theory of dehousing civilian populations. Destroying workers' homes proved more effective than bombing the factories where they worked. Workers without shelter, food, or reliable transportation couldn't maintain production levels, even if their factories somehow survived the bombing. Post-war analysis revealed the campaign's strategic brilliance in unexpected ways. Destroying urban areas forced Japan to evacuate 8.5 million people to the countryside. This created a massive refugee crisis that consumed resources desperately needed for war production. Transportation systems collapsed under the enormous burden of moving millions of refugees. This prevented raw materials from reaching surviving factories that might otherwise have continued production. The psychological strategy proved equally sophisticated and effective. By announcing target cities in advance through leaflet drops, the Americans created panic migrations that disrupted production more than the actual bombing raids themselves. Workers fled from threatened cities in terror, abandoning their factory posts days before raids actually occurred. Production stopped not from bomb damage, but from psychological warfare. General Curtis LeMay's decision to switch from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude area bombing represented one of the most consequential command decisions of the entire war. On March 7, 1945, he made this choice unilaterally. LeMay didn't even inform his superior, General Henry Arnold, until after the first successful raid. This decision violated established doctrine and risked his entire military career. LeMay later wrote about the moment of decision that changed everything. He woke up at 2 a.m. with the complete solution clear in his mind. Strip the defensive guns from the bombers. Fly low at night. Carry only incendiary bombs. The plan violated everything military doctrine had taught about strategic bombing. But the mathematical calculations were undeniable. They could destroy Japan's cities completely using this method. Or they could continue failing to hit specific precision targets. The personal burden of this decision weighed heavily on LeMay's shoulders. He fully expected a court-martial if the radical new tactics failed catastrophically. He personally briefed every crew commander, explaining that he was ordering them to fly defenseless aircraft into the enemy's heavily defended capital city. If the mission didn't succeed, he told his staff to send him home in chains. His career and reputation depended entirely on the success of this unprecedented tactical gamble. The spectacular success of the March 10th raid vindicated LeMay's judgment completely. But he never glorified the decision or celebrated the destruction. In his post-war memoirs, he acknowledged the moral weight of what they had accomplished. They knew they were going to kill enormous numbers of women and children. But if the war had continued much longer, millions more would have died in a ground invasion of Japan. It represented simple arithmetic, horrible, necessary arithmetic that would haunt him forever. The firebombing campaign fundamentally altered Japanese culture and society in ways that persisted for generations. The traditional concept of mujo, meaning impermanence, took on entirely new meaning as entire cities vanished overnight in flames. Traditional Japanese architecture that had evolved over centuries proved fatally vulnerable to modern industrial warfare. Wooden construction that had withstood earthquakes and typhoons for generations burned completely in minutes when exposed to napalm. Post-war urban planning directly reflected the trauma of firebombing experiences. Cities were rebuilt with wide boulevards that could serve as effective fire breaks during future emergencies. Building codes mandated concrete construction materials. Public parks were specifically designed as mass evacuation areas. Modern Tokyo's seemingly random layout, with unexpected open spaces throughout the urban area, directly results from firebombing experience and the need for fire breaks. The Japanese language itself evolved to accommodate the new realities of modern warfare. New words entered common daily usage that had never existed before. Napalm Dan meant napalm bomb. Shoshodan meant incendiary bomb. Higaisha meant bombing victim. The phrase yakenohara, meaning burned field, became synonymous with total destruction. These linguistic changes reflected how deeply the bombing experience had penetrated Japanese consciousness. Japanese literature and cinema grappled with the bombing experience for decades after the war ended. Novelist Kobo Abe, who personally witnessed bombing attacks in Manchuria, wrote surrealist works exploring themes of identity loss and urban destruction. Film director Akira Kurosawa's post-war movies often featured fire as a destructive force, reflecting the national trauma embedded in Japanese culture. The imagery of uncontrolled fire appeared repeatedly in his most celebrated films. The legal status of the firebombing campaign remains actively debated among international law scholars even today. The 1907 Hague Convention prohibited the bombing of undefended cities. However, Japan's cities contained legitimate military targets and active air defense systems. This technically made them legitimate military targets under existing international law. The principle of proportionality required that civilian casualties not be excessive relative to anticipated military advantage. But this principle was poorly defined in 1945. American military planners argued that destroying Japan's dispersed war industry system justified area bombing tactics. Critics contended that deliberately creating firestorms to maximize civilian casualties violated fundamental laws of warfare. Robert McNamara, who helped plan the bombing campaign as a young statistical analyst, later reflected on the moral implications with striking honesty. LeMay had told him that if America had lost the war, they would all have been prosecuted as war criminals. McNamara believed LeMay was absolutely right. They had behaved as war criminals during the campaign. But what makes actions immoral if you lose, and not immoral if you win? The question haunted him for the rest of his life. The Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes trials established new legal precedents for crimes against humanity. However, these trials notably did not address Allied bombing campaigns against civilian targets. The 1949 Geneva Conventions attempted to clarify legal protections for civilians during wartime. These new international laws were largely written in response to World War II's extensive area bombing campaigns by all belligerent nations. How the firebombing campaign is remembered today remains contested between Japanese and American historical narratives. In Japan, the bombing raids are primarily memorialized as civilian victimization. Peace museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and other bombed cities display melted artifacts and preserve survivor testimonies. March 10th is officially observed as Tokyo Peace Day in the capital city. School children visit memorial sites and listen to elderly survivors share their experiences. American historical memory has largely forgotten the firebombing campaign. The atomic bomb's dramatic singularity overshadowed conventional bombing in popular consciousness. Military histories emphasize the campaign's strategic success in ending the war without requiring a ground invasion. The profound moral questions that tormented Robert McNamara rarely enter American public discourse about World War II. The bombing campaign is treated as a tactical success rather than a moral dilemma. Survivors like Katsumoto Saotomi fought for decades seeking recognition comparable to atomic bomb survivors. They argued that firebombing victims deserved the same acknowledgement and commemoration as nuclear attack survivors. The Japanese government long resisted these efforts. Officials worried about complicating Japan's victim narrative or creating diplomatic tensions with their American ally. Recognition might imply criticism of American wartime actions. Recent historical scholarship has attempted more balanced assessment of the firebombing campaign. Historian Richard Frank's book, Downfall, argues the bombing campaign saved millions of lives by preventing a ground invasion of Japan. Mark Selden's work, The Firebombings of Tokyo and Japan, emphasizes the deliberate targeting of civilian populations. These competing interpretations reflect ongoing debates about the morality of total warfare. The firebombing campaign's technological innovations continued influencing warfare for generations after 1945. Napalm, perfected specifically for attacks on Japan, became a standard military weapon used extensively in Korea and Vietnam. The cluster bomb concept evolved into modern precision-guided munitions systems. The operational research methods developed to plan bombing raids became standard military practice. Statistical analysis, probability calculations, and systems optimization became routine tools. Robert McNamara later applied these same analytical methods as Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War. His systems analysis approach produced controversial results when applied to counterinsurgency warfare. Weather prediction capabilities for military operations advanced significantly during the firebombing campaign. The techniques developed to predict optimal firestorm conditions contributed to modern meteorological science and weather forecasting accuracy. Understanding of fire behavior, urban conflagration patterns, and thermal effects influenced urban planning and fire safety regulations worldwide. Modern building codes and emergency response procedures reflect lessons learned from Japanese city fires. The B-29 bomber itself quickly became obsolete in the emerging jet age despite its Pacific War success. However, the massive industrial mobilization required to produce these aircraft demonstrated American capacity for rapid technological achievement. This industrial capability provided the foundation for the post-war aerospace industry and eventually the space program. The same companies and facilities that built B-29 bombers later produced commercial airliners and rockets. Final casualty figures from the firebombing campaign remain disputed among historians, but documented evidence provides minimum numbers that reveal the scale of destruction. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey counted 330,000 confirmed deaths and 476,000 injured from conventional bombing alone. Japanese government statistical records suggested approximately 500,000 total deaths from the bombing campaign. Some historians estimate up to 900,000 deaths when including delayed mortality from severe burns, smoke inhalation damage, and disease outbreaks among displaced populations. Beyond the death toll, the campaign created 8.5 million refugees, representing 30% of Japan's entire urban population. These displaced people overwhelmed rural areas unprepared to support them. 2.5 million buildings were completely destroyed across the targeted cities. Economic losses from the bombing exceeded 25% of Japan's total national wealth. Industrial production capacity fell to just 10% of pre-war levels. the economic foundation of modern Japanese society, had been systematically destroyed. The psychological toll of the bombing proved impossible to measure accurately. Dr. Masahiro Yamamoto's comprehensive post-war study examined 10,000 bombing survivors across multiple cities. His findings revealed the persistent mental health impact of the traumatic experience. 73% of survivors suffered from chronic anxiety disorders. 61% reported recurring nightmares decades after the war ended. 44% displayed symptoms that would now be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. These psychological traumas were passed to subsequent generations through family dynamics and cultural memory. Children and grandchildren of survivors showed elevated rates of anxiety and depression even without direct bombing exposure. Medical consequences of the bombing persisted for decades after the war ended. Survivors displayed elevated rates of respiratory diseases caused by smoke inhalation during the raids. Chronic pain from burn injuries affected daily life for thousands of people. Increased cancer rates among survivors were possibly related to toxic chemical exposures during the fires. However, the Japanese government provided no comprehensive medical care specifically for firebombing survivors. This contrasted sharply with atomic bomb victims who received special medical benefits and ongoing government support. Firebombing survivors received no such recognition or assistance. Curtis LeMay never apologized for the firebombing campaign, but acknowledged its profound moral weight throughout his later life. In his autobiography, he wrote that every soldier must consider the moral aspects of his actions during warfare. But all warfare is inherently immoral by nature. If moral considerations prevented effective military action, a person couldn't function as a good soldier. This philosophy guided his wartime decisions. His deputy, Brigadier General Thomas Power, proved more reflective about the campaign's human cost. American forces killed more Japanese civilians through firebombing than died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. They knew exactly what they were doing during the campaign. The strategic idea was to kill enough civilians that Japan would surrender unconditionally. The tactic worked effectively, but at what cost to American humanity? Japanese perspectives on the firebombing evolved significantly over the decades following the war. Initially, survivors focused primarily on their victimization by foreign attack. They emphasized their suffering without considering broader wartime context. Later generations began acknowledging that Japan's military aggression had invited devastating retaliation. Some survivors argued this provided important lessons about the consequences of aggressive warfare. Katsumoto Saotome argued for universal lessons that transcended nationality. The firebombing demonstrated what modern industrial warfare truly means. It showed the complete destruction of civilian society that modern weapons make possible. This reality is why humanity must never allow another major war to occur. The potential for destruction has grown too enormous for civilization to survive. American airmen who participated in the bombing campaign showed varying responses to their wartime service. Some maintained throughout their lives that the bombing was absolutely necessary to end the war quickly and save lives on both sides. Others struggled with persistent guilt about their role in civilian deaths. Tail gunner Joseph Majeski never discussed his bombing missions until shortly before his death. His final reflections revealed the psychological burden many carried. He had seen the massive fires they created from his aircraft. He knew people were dying in those flames below. Women and children were burning to death because of his actions. You do what military duty requires during wartime. But the knowledge of what you've done stays with you forever. The memories never fade or become easier to bear. The firebombing of Japan represented the absolute culmination of strategic bombing theory, industrial warfare capabilities, and technological innovation applied to systematic destruction. In just 9 months of intensive bombing, American forces dropped 158,000 tons of incendiary bombs. This massive bombardment destroyed 175 square miles of urban area across 66 targeted cities. The campaign killed more Japanese civilians than 2 full years of ground combat throughout the Pacific Theater. The operation succeeded through meticulous planning, overwhelming industrial capacity, and radical tactical innovation that abandoned established doctrine. LeMay's decision to strip defensive weapons and fly at low altitude doubled bombing effectiveness overnight. The development of napalm gel created the perfect weapon for attacking Japan's predominantly wooden cities. The sticky, burning gel could penetrate any structure and ignite materials that normal incendiaries couldn't affect. Yet the campaign's success came specifically through deliberately targeting civilian populations. The dispersal of Japanese war industry provided strategic rationale. But this didn't provide moral justification for systematically burning entire residential districts filled with non-combatants. The campaign's planners knew they were killing enormous numbers of civilians, including women and children. They proceeded anyway, calculating that massive civilian casualties would force Japan's government to surrender unconditionally. The survivors' personal testimonies provide the human dimension behind strategic statistics. Haruyo Nihei pulled from beneath corpses as a child. Yoshiko Hashimoto discovering her mother's charred remains. Katsumoto Sayotomi running through seas of flame that consumed his neighborhood. Their accounts preserve the reality of industrial warfare. Not abstract military strategy, but children watching their parents burn alive while being completely powerless to help them survive. Modern Tokyo still bears the hidden scars of the firebombing campaign throughout its urban landscape. Parks and wide boulevards mark locations of former fire zones. Memorial markers list the names of entire neighborhoods that vanished completely during single nights. Elderly survivors still flinch involuntarily at the sound of air raid sirens. They avoid grilled food because smoke triggers traumatic memories. They fear orange sunsets that remind them of burning cities. The psychological trauma embedded itself permanently in Japanese culture. It shaped post-war pacifism and the country's alliance with its former enemies. The experience influenced Japan's constitutional commitment to never again wage aggressive warfare. The strategic success of forcing surrender without invasion must be carefully weighed against enormous moral costs. The campaign proved that area bombing could destroy entire nations, but it raised fundamental questions about acceptable limits in warfare. Robert McNamara's late-life admission haunts historical judgment. American forces were behaving as war criminals during the campaign. This reflects unresolved tensions between military necessity and basic human morality that persist today. The firebombing campaign stands as history's most destructive application of conventional weapons against urban civilian targets. It demonstrated both American industrial might and warfare's descent into calculated mass killing of non-combatants. The fires that consumed Japanese cities burned away previous illusions about modern war's true nature. This wasn't conflict between opposing armies. It was systematic destruction of entire societies using industrial-scale killing methods. Japan had never expected American napalm to make the rain itself catch fire. They couldn't imagine temperatures hot enough to boil rivers dry. They never conceived of artificial weather systems that generated cyclonic winds within cities. They prepared for conventional warfare between military forces. Instead, they faced complete erasure of their cities by an enemy whose industrial capacity exceeded their comprehension. The technological gap proved insurmountable. The moral legacy remains deeply contentious. The fundamental questions remain unanswered after decades of debate. But the voices of survivors preserved through decades of testimony ensure the human cost will never be forgotten by history. As Katsumoto Saotomi wrote shortly before his death, he told these stories not seeking sympathy, but providing warning. This is what warfare becomes when advanced technology serves systematic destruction. May humanity never again unleash such fires upon itself. The statistical numbers tell one story of destruction: 330,000 to 900,000 civilian deaths, 66 cities destroyed, 8.5 million people rendered homeless. These numbers document the scale, but not the human reality. The personal testimonies tell a different story entirely. Children becoming orphans in seconds, entire families vanishing in flames, complete neighborhoods erased from existence overnight. Together, these accounts document the moment warfare crossed into something new and terrible. The capability to destroy entire civilizations from the air had been achieved. Centuries of accumulated culture could be reduced to ash in a single night of bombing. That capability, first demonstrated over Tokyo on March 10, 1945, forever changed warfare's fundamental nature. The fires that consumed Japan's cities lit the pathway to our current nuclear age. Today, entire nations exist perpetually, one political decision away from complete annihilation. The Japanese witnessed their basic assumptions about warfare destroyed by overwhelming fire. Fire that fell from the sky like burning rain. Fire that flowed through streets like molten rivers. Fire that consumed absolutely everything it touched until entire cities simply ceased to exist.